A topic very prevalent in our suburb here in North Lakes, and so thank you for coming out. We hope the night is informative for you and helpful in some way to your faith and to your life, to your everyday life. So my name's Jono, if I haven't yet met, and it's a privilege to share in this night with you all and with these wonderful people who I'll introduce you to in just a moment. So why are we doing this night? Because when it comes to our suburb, we want to be connected to the issues that are going on. And when you look at the census data of North Lakes, and in particular how it relates to our health, we are off the charts healthy in most areas of major disease. So think diabetes, cancer, etc. The statistics show we are incredibly healthy in those areas. However, in the area of depression and anxiety, we are very low, and so we've got issues in those areas. And so we want to put on a night like tonight to help and provide some hope and just put the conversation on the table and say we're a church that cares about these things because we know that God cares about these things. We know that everybody's mental health journey is very, very different, and so this tonight is not about putting it in a box, nor is it about saying that we can cover everybody or send you home all with a major breakthrough, although we'd love to see that happen. But I love this comment from Sam Albury where he says this: "There is not a single image bearer on the planet whose story is not worthy of our careful attention." I love that, but reality is when we come together as a corporate group, we can't cover every possible scenario, so we will be generalising at some points or drilling down mainly on depression and anxiety because of the prevalence of those in our suburb. But we hope that you hear something that gives your life hope and something that communicates to you that we believe we have a creator, we believe that he loves us and wants to connect with us and make a difference in our life, and this is why we do a night like tonight. So I want to introduce you now to the panel. In fact, I'll let them introduce themselves. Why don't you just welcome them for a start? But they're sitting, if we can go back to our home slide, they're sitting in the order of their names there, so that will help you remember through the night. But why don't you go first, Cheryl, introducing yourself?
My name's Cheryl Smith. I've been a counsellor in private practice for many years and worked in organisations for a number of years before that as well as relationship and generalist therapist and family therapist. Much of my work these days is done with clients who suffer anxiety, and many of my clients have breast cancer, and so you can imagine the anxiety that goes along with that. So that's really my specialist area.
I'm Jeremy. I'm a general practitioner working up in Morayfield. I see general patients as well, but my focus, one of my special areas of interest is in complex community mental health. So a pleasure to be here.
Hi, my name's Scott. I'm a psychologist. I was calculating it today. 23 years I've been doing it now. So I've done a mixture of private practice work. I did that for 13 years. And then I work at a private mental health clinic, working in areas of depression, anxiety, addiction, trauma, and things like that. And I'm married to Kelly and have two teenage girls, Amelia and Eliza.
Hello. Oh, can we? Yes. Hello, I'm Rose. I am Steve's wife. Steve's sitting in the second row there. Hi, Steve. I am the proud mum. I'm 41 and I'm the proud mum of two girls, Ruby, who's just turned 6, and Lila, who's going to turn 4 in a couple of weeks. I'm here tonight to share with you some of my mental health journey and some stuff that's gone on for me. So, yeah, thank you for having me.
Hi everyone, I'm Isaac, I'm 24 and I'm Monica's husband. And I'm here tonight also to share parts of my mental health journey, particularly with my previous and ongoing struggles with anxiety. And as Jono said, I don't know any of your stories out there tonight, but I hope by sharing my experience you can feel that it's normal and that it can happen to everyone. And hopefully, as we talk about this stuff, we can provide some hope as well. Yeah.
Cool. Well, welcome again. So we're going to first start by defining what do we mean when we talk about depression and anxiety. So first, Jeremy, Dr. Jeremy, can you give us a working definition of depression?
Thanks, Jono. I don't want to be over technical here, but when we have medical speak with definitions, we have to be very exact, because when I say on a letter or I give a patient a diagnosis, we have to mean that you meet certain criteria. So for depression, or what used to be called MDD, major depressive disorder, it has to have some time severity definitions. So it must be that it's 2 weeks or more. It has to have 5 key features, so 5 symptoms out of 8, that would essentially speak towards the severity of it. One of those features must either be that you suffer from low mood, or that you have a decrease in your pleasure, and that's a term called anhedonia. It must cause some significant dysfunction in your life. So you have a difficult time caring for yourself, going to work, caring for your children. And it must also be in the absence of medical conditions. Now, some of those features that we talk about would be that there's a change in your appetite or in your weight. Sometimes that'll go up or down, depending on the person. Sometimes you'll have sleep disturbances, a disturbance in your energy level. Sometimes you'll have what we call neurocognitive or vegetation symptoms. So that would be a slowing of your attention, memory, focus, or concentration. And sometimes you also have suicidal ideations. So of that big list, you must have 5. It must be over 2 weeks. It must not be relatable to a medical condition, and it must cause dysfunction. So that's depression.
And Cheryl, can you talk to us about anxiety?
Yep, so anxiety is a blend of emotional, physical and mental responses to a perceived threat or uncertainty. It includes the emotional responses like dread or fear or worry. Physical responses, there can be an experience of racing heart, dry throat, tense muscles, trouble sleeping, feeling restless. And mental responses, often overthinking, ruminating, difficulty concentrating and imagining worst case scenarios. The main thing to remember, I think, the thing that stands out for me about anxiety is that the physical symptoms of anxiety show up 100,000 times faster than our recognition of what's going on for us. It might only be a split second, but it's always the first thing. So the more we become attuned to our body at rest and then our body when something's going on, the quicker we can intervene. So what actually happens in the brain when there's a perceived threat, we have an organ either side of our brain, about the size of an almond, called the amygdala. And the amygdala is like a radar. It's always scanning to pick up a threat to our well-being. So it's there to keep us safe. What happens when it believes that there's an external threat to our life and well-being? It sends signals to our adrenaline, our adrenals, adrenaline being our strength hormone, and our body becomes flooded with adrenaline. Specifically, it goes to our arms and our legs so we can run or fight. So that's the fight-flight mechanism you may have heard of. It can also cause us to freeze. Sometimes when we're so afraid, we do nothing. And that's the safest thing for us to do. The challenge with that is that these days it's often emotional distress, not external threat, that causes anxiety, but the amygdala can't tell the difference. So therefore, it's a challenge that needs to be addressed. When the adrenaline is pumping, it takes a lot of blood and oxygen for it to get to our extremities, and a lot of that blood and oxygen is taken from our frontal cortex, where we think, reason and make sense of things, where we make decisions. And so often we can't access that higher level of thinking when we're in that anxious state, which means that we can't have as much control over our thinking. We can't make good decisions and we can't ground ourselves easily. In small doses, anxiety can be really helpful. It can keep us alert, can help us prepare for challenges, or protect us from danger. But when those anxious feelings become too strong, happen too often, or last a long time, they can start to affect our everyday life. There's approximately 3 million Australians suffering from anxiety currently. It's the most common mental health condition in Australia, and 1 in 4 people will experience anxiety at some stage in their life.
Last year, when Elena was on the panel up here, she gave us the example of anxiety being like a smoke alarm. And so just differentiating between when it can be helpful or not, it is that alarm that's meant to go off when we're in danger. But the problem is when the smoke alarm's going off and it's 3 o'clock in the morning and there's no danger and you're trying to sleep, right? And that's when it's unhelpful. And just from a biblical perspective, I also want to mention that whilst anxiety gets written off as completely evil, in kind of a simplistic way in the Christian church often because of Philippians 4, where it says, don't be anxious for anything, but instead, in everything, with prayer and supplication, let your requests be made known to God. So it kind of makes this what seems like a wide-sweeping statement to say all anxiety is bad. Actually, a couple of chapters before, Paul's saying to the same letter, same church, I'm anxious to see you. And the same Greek word, because I care about you, then the same Greek word is used. So a couple of chapters earlier, we find a healthy version of anxiety, a healthy concern. Like, for example, if you get a phone call to say your mother's just been rushed to emergency and you feel nothing, that's a problem. You're supposed to feel a level of concern about that. So there's an anxiety that would kick in there that would be natural, it would be godly even. And that's what Philippians 2 would be talking about. And then Philippians 4 is the unhealthy version of anxiety where we're weight-bearing and we're carrying loads that God didn't intend for us to carry, and he wants us to hand them over to him. So all that to say is, when we say one word, there's an umbrella of different terms and, definitions underneath that. And we're talking in some respect tonight about the spectrum of that. But I just wanted to clarify from a biblical perspective, it's not just, one shot and you're done here when we talk about anxiety. Even within Scripture, within the same book of Scripture, that famous verse in Philippians 4 actually has nuance within that. So, Scott, coming to you now, why are depression and anxiety growing in our suburb and in the modern world in general?
Yeah, well, it turns out that depression and anxiety is growing exponentially in westernised, industrialised countries. So the countries that live closer to the land actually don't have the rates of increase that we do. And look, some people will say it's because we've got better at recognising and diagnosing these issues, and I think there's some truth to that. But the best research shows us that it's definitely increasing with each generation in prevalence and severity. And in fact, the World Health Organization came out in 2004 and ranked depression as the 4th highest cause of disability and human suffering behind cancer, heart disease and traffic accidents. And they made a prediction that depression would be the 2nd highest cause of disability and suffering by 2020. But actually by 2013, it was at number 2. And then by 2017, it was number 1. So we're seeing this rapid rise of particularly depression and anxiety. And the question is why? And, it's not a simple answer. There's multiple factors going on, but there's a particular researcher that I really like called Stephen Alardi. And he makes the case that depression and anxiety is actually a disease of civilization. And what he means by that is that we are fundamentally living out of sync with our biological and psychological and spiritual design in modern cultures, as opposed to our, grandparents and our forebears. And I love his quote. I'm going to read it to you. He says this is his catchphrase: "We were never designed for the sedentary, indoor, sleep-deprived, socially isolated, fast food-laden, frenetic pace of modern life." And that is so true. We're not designed for that. And he's actually developed a treatment protocol called therapeutic lifestyle change. So it's focused on lifestyle changes that bring us more into a line with our design. And some of those interventions, there's actually 6 things he focuses on. The first is nutrition, so eating more whole foods, and particularly increasing omega-3. In many Western countries, we do not get enough omega-3, which promotes more inflammation in the body and interferes with neurotransmission. Fighting rumination, which is getting stuck in our heads. So strategies for staying more engaged in what we're doing. Increasing exercise and movement. So we have become more sedentary, and I was just saying to the guys earlier that not exercising is like taking depressants. Right, that our body needs to move to release serotonin, dopamine, noradrenaline, endorphins. There's another really cool substance called endocannabinoids, which is exactly what it sounds like, naturally occurring weed, but it's good for you. There's all of these things that we need that can only come through exercise and movement. Another part of intervention is bright light exposure. We're kind of having that right now. So this is antidepressant right now. But no, we are designed to be outdoors and with outdoor lights. And during a normal day, it's like 10,000 times brighter than this. And that's what our brain's designed for. That bright light exposure resets our body clock, circadian rhythm. And it also stimulates serotonin and dopamine signalling in the brain, which are our feel-good neurotransmitters. So the recommendation on that, just briefly, is within 1 hour of awakening, we want to have about 15 to 30 minutes of bright light exposure. And it has been shown to be profoundly antidepressant and helpful for our mental health. The other 2 things, increasing social connection, I'll talk more to that later, and then establishing healthy sleep habits. So all of these lifestyle interventions. And his protocol, those 6 things, shows that people that do those things, 70% of them will have a total remission of their depressive episode through lifestyle change by living more in accordance with our design. That's an incredible outcome rate. Now, the other factor that we can't ignore is technology, right? There is no question, particularly amongst young people, that around about 2012, 2013, there was an exponential increase in mental health problems amongst young people, coinciding with smart devices and their prevalence in the community. And one of my other favourite depression researchers, a guy called Michael Yapko, he says unequivocally, the more time you spend on a screen, the more likely it is that you will be depressed and anxious. Right? The jury's in on that. But the question is why, and I think most of us can kind of intuitively figure out some of these things, but I think one of the big things is the reduction of true social connectedness. Right? Our interpersonal skills and our attachments to others are affected by technology. In fact, we have a parity of connection, right, through a lot of this stuff. I think another thing is the constant social comparison. All right, when we're online, we're constantly seeing the shiny people with their wonderful things. I think many people are familiar with the term comparing our behind the scenes to other people's highlight reels. We end up feeling diminished and deficient, which is not good for our mental health. Online bullying, sleep disruption. Screens trick our brain into believing that it's still daytime, and they disrupt the release of things like melatonin that helps us to go to sleep when it's getting dark, and they overstimulate our brain. Reduction of physical movement. We're sitting on screens, we're not out there running around and keeping the body moving. And I think the other thing, which many of us are, I think, cluing onto in our own lives, is unconscious addiction. That our brain releases the reward chemical dopamine, right, in response to novelty and newness. Right? So we get a release of dopamine, which makes us feel good. But with our screens, it's endless. We're looking at something, flick, oh, that's new and interesting. Flick, oh, that's new and interesting. Dopamine surge, dopamine surge, dopamine surge. And that is not unlike what addictive substances do. They cause excessive overstimulation of dopamine. And in response to that, the brain actually down-regulates the dopamine system. It drops dopamine receptors, And then we get a term that Jeremy said before, anhedonia, which means the inability to experience pleasure. So we feel flat and dull, often a loss of motivation and energy, right, which is a core symptom of depression. Right? So technology biologically is manipulating our brains, addicting us, but also making us more depressed. So this is all bad news, of course. The good news is, the more we can make decisions, lifestyle decisions that move us more in the direction of our forebears, like our grandparents, and the more we can moderate our use of technology. Because it's not an inherent evil to use technology. There's many great things, but we need to moderate it. So yeah, that's some of the things I think accounts for the increase.
I have a quote here from Brad Hambrick that just kind of adds to what Scott was just saying. If we can, there we go. In modern times, the genes load the gun and the environment pulls the trigger. And another quote here by John Eldridge that I think very closely aligns as well. The internet is discipling us not only in content but process. So that tendency that Scott just mentioned of scrolling, of constantly needing something new, is actually training us, and certainly not training us to wait on God and deepen our spiritual, ability to concentrate. So, it's just things to be aware of. We're not going to ever be able to go back to the lifestyle our grandparents lived. However, we can make some choices that are healthy, that are going to lead us in the right direction. So, Isaac, can you share a little how you've gone about finding mental health support for your life?
Sure. Thank you, Jono. So I'll start off by saying, all those things that Cheryl was talking about of anxiety feel very true for me, even right now in this moment. That racing heart, that breathing, the overactive mind. And the first thing I wanted to talk about with my experience is that it can actually be pretty difficult to understand that what's happening to you, and certainly what was happening to me, is actually anxiety. And you might just not have the education on it, or just have the awareness of it either. And so there was a good time in my life, particularly growing up as a teenager, where I didn't realise what I was experiencing was anxiety. And as a result, that was a real barrier to me seeking any help. But then even then, when I did finally become aware of what I was experiencing was in fact some form of anxiety, there was a reluctance to seeking help, and I think that comes from a few places. I think for me personally, it was thinking that I can actually handle this on my own, or it's enough for me just to go online and find resources and try and manage this myself, and perhaps even just being a bit stubborn as well about seeking that. But thankfully, in about 2022, when my anxiety was probably at the worst it was, I had my parents, and I've got a strong support network in them, encouraged me to see a GP. And so I went and saw my local GP, and thankfully they were very receptive, and they were able to walk me through a mental health care plan, which is good in a therapeutic sense, but also good to just outline sort of the problems that you've been experiencing and been able to put a name to them and give you some hope that something can get done there. And so with the mental health care plan, that allowed me to go see a psychologist. And we were talking earlier, it's important to mention that psychologists can be pretty expensive. And certainly for me, that was my experience. But the mental health care plan allows you to get a good chunk of that money back, so it shouldn't be as financially taxing for you. And anyway, so at the psychologist, the first time I ever went to a psychologist, it was awful. I did not connect with that person. I did not feel like they were listening to me. And they might not be a bad psychologist. It might have just been that day. But for me, I did not connect with them. And so I had to pick up and find another one. And eventually I did find a good psychologist. And again, we were talking about just the importance of one psychologist isn't going to be right for everyone. You might have to find someone that you connect with, and certainly someone that you trust. And so I'd really encourage you to be persistent in that search for a good psychologist, because it's not easy, finding someone who you do connect with. And it's also just not easy, with all the waiting lists and the backup of getting to a psychologist as well. So I'd really encourage you to persist there. And just briefly as well, the psychologist went through some tools that we'll talk about later with Cheryl and Scott, on just how to cope with my anxiety. And for a good while, that really helped. And I had about a 1.5 year period where I felt really good again. I felt stable, felt able to cope with the stresses that came in life. But then around the end of last year, I had a lot of changes in my life. I started a new course in university. I got married, not that that's a bad change or anything. But sort of that overwhelming time for me sort of led to a recurrence of my anxiety, and I noticed those old feelings and old thoughts coming back. And I want to say that because I don't think our mental health journey is necessarily a linear path. We can take 2 steps forward and maybe 1 step back here and there, and that I say that just to make sure that everyone understands that that's okay. It's not a one-stop shop. It's not a one-time fix. But the good thing was that now that I had already sought that help before and going to a GP and going to a psychologist, I understood the process now. And so I was able to be much more proactive in seeking out a psychologist early on. And I connected with a great psychologist at my university. And we've worked together probably over the last 3 or 4 months and developed some really good tools that have equipped me to deal with that. And just as one final note, we also mentioned that, again, finding a psychologist can be quite difficult with all the queues and things like that. But if you're in university, there are often university psychologists at a discounted rate for you. And also in your workplaces, I believe many of you would have an employee assistance program as well. So please feel free to reach out to them if you can't find a psychologist elsewhere.
I think what Isaac said about, trying again if the first one isn't a good fit, because there's got to be some kind of chemistry there, right? And if it's not happening, then try a different one. But if you need that assistance, then continue to press in. Rose is going to share. So just mentioning again that you have 3 professionals in the middle here. I'm not including myself in that list. And then Rose and Isaac, and they're here to share some of their experience. And I really think that's important, to put models up here before you. And it takes a lot of courage, let me tell you, to sit up here and do this. But they're the link between you and the professionals who have all of the answers, right? And so I just want to really express my appreciation. Of course you have all the answers. I just want to really express my appreciation to these guys and acknowledge their courage. So Rose is going to share with us some of her journey in mental health and what's helped her along the way.
So my journey's been a pretty long one. It started from when I was about 11, when I became depressed and anxious. At the time, at 11, I didn't know that. It led on to things like eating disorders, self-harm, suicidal ideation, so body dysmorphia, eating disorders, just not loving myself at all. So this carried on from that young age right through my teens. I had amazing supports with my parents and I got help, and on and off I would be well and then I would become unwell again. It carried on into my 20s, into my 30s. In my 30s, I had my 2 beautiful girls. Steve and I had to undergo IVF for being able to conceive. And IVF, if you've ever done it, you'll know it's an extremely grueling process and you're pumped full of hormones. And when you're someone like me who's already prone to having a bit of a rough time, can make it even worse. In a period of, it was probably around 3 years, we had 4 pregnancies, 2 live births and 2 miscarriages. So ultimately I ended up with severe treatment-resistant postnatal depression, and I was admitted to the mother-baby unit at Belmont Private Hospital. I had 2 stays there. I underwent treatment during the period of probably 2 years, around 12 medication changes that unfortunately didn't stabilise how I was. I had TMS, which is transcranial magnetic stimulation. It's something that's used. It's hard to explain. It's sort of like something that goes around your head. You're awake. It doesn't cause any pain or anything like that, and it's sort of just a a pulsating, the specialist might be able to explain it better, a pulsating magnetic, it's supposed to sort of help depression. It probably does for a lot of people. For me, unfortunately, it didn't. After my second hospitalisation, medication changes again, being incredibly unwell, I made the ultimate decision. It's sort of like an end-of-the-line decision to do electroconvulsive therapy, which is ECT. There's a lot of stigma around that. And getting up here tonight and actually saying, hey, yep, I'm one of those people that's actually been there. I've been in that place where I've needed to get it. Was super duper scary, but I really just hope that, I can help anyone else who's feeling that way know that things do get better. And ultimately for me, the ECT probably saved my life. And I remember waking up one day, it was just beautiful. I remember waking up and I'd had this months and months of darkness, just darkness, and waking up one day and sitting out in the sun, and my first thought was, oh, this is a nice day. And then it's a nice day. So for me, I hadn't had that feeling in so long, and I had it, and it was just, I'll just remember it like it was yesterday, and I was like, the ECT is working. So I've been stable for about 3 years now. I take regular medication, I'm not ashamed to admit that. And it has altered my life, but if anything, it's helped me be more compassionate and understanding and be able to see things that other people sometimes can't see. See someone who's in pain, see someone who's hurting, and be able to go, hey, are you okay? I know how you're feeling.
Thank you, Rose. Appreciate you sharing. Jeremy, what do you wish, as a medical doctor, what do you wish churches understood better in this whole area?
I think from hearing Isaac and Rose's story, you get a sense sometimes of how dark and difficult life can be. And their stories are not necessarily different from the rest of ours. Depression and anxiety is really common. Sometimes we have a really rough go, and sometimes it's really, really, really rough. So in the community, we tend to stigmatize mental health because it's a condition that you cannot see. So if you look at us here and I asked you who's suffering from mental health, it would be a 50-50 guess, wouldn't it? But sometimes it's difficult for you to understand the torment that people go through, because on the outside you look really put together. And sometimes you put a little mask on when you go out of your house and you pretend that things are okay. Now, we understand health in medicine from what's called a biopsychosocial model. And in that model, it describes that you are one person, one life, one being. And you have different parts of that being, and each part has to be humming on the right frequencies for you to enjoy full, complete health. And so the bio would be the body, the psycho would be the mind, and the social would be the interconnectedness that we all live. Now, Jono keeps preaching about the health of the church, and a healthy church must be head, heart, and hand. And so, like, we are one church, and those are the markers of a healthy church. So we must be also body, mind, and hand healthy. And so sometimes it's really easy to, in the community, look at to someone and we understand what physical illness is like. Right? Disease, cancer, infection, missing body parts. It's pretty easy to understand, but it's hard to understand social isolation as a factor of ill health, and also mental health as a factor of ill health. So sometimes when we understand from the stigmatization of the community, mental health is hard to fess up and say that you're struggling with it. Partly because people will misunderstand that as those are factors that are within your control. Scott mentioned that it's about 40% genetics and about 60% environmental. And what that means essentially is that you might have just drawn the unlucky card and mental health runs strong in your genes. It also could mean that you were born into a family where mom and dad had depression and anxiety, so there was a chaotic family, poor coping strategies, poor role modeling. You could have had some trauma and some negative experiences. And so people who are born with these sorts of either genetics or environmental factors don't necessarily have anything within their control to manifest this. And so the judgment of saying, oh, well, you have severe depression and anxiety, you're either weak or soft or not trying hard enough, is really untrue. Now, in the church, that's made even worse because we come from a spiritual aspect of saying, oh, it could be that you lack faith, you're not praying hard enough, you're not under the protection and the banner of God, or that there's some hidden sin that we're not dealing with. So you can see that whilst those things can be true, that it's just a really heavy burden that people carry with mental health. Now, I spend a lot of time in my clinic trying to tackle these things. Because when people come and seek help, they're not here because they're having a great time. They're not here because they want to necessarily. They're here because they're at the end of their rope, they've tried everything on their own power, and they don't know where else to turn. And so a lot of the work that we're doing not only is psychoeducation about what the disease is, and what things can we understand, what the treatment entails, but also undoing a lot of these negative, self-deprecating thoughts that people have with themselves. And so one of my plays with the church is to understand how prevalent this is, how normal these are, but also how heavy the burden that people who have mental health are carrying. And it's hard within the community, as Isaac said. There's a lot of reluctance in telling people or fessing up. But it's also very difficult when you don't then get that acceptance and support through the church community.
Before, Cheryl, I invite you to speak, I just want to add that our church forefathers understood our three enemies were the world, the flesh, and the devil. So to just blame anything that's going on in our life in one of those areas is very simplistic. You know, as we talked about this morning in the message, just say it's all Satan's fault will be simplistic. Or it's also simplistic, as Jeremy's saying, to say it's all your fault if we're having a struggle. It's often very nuanced and very much a blend of all of these things. And what we need as our first response is great compassion, right? Before anything else, before finger pointing, before challenging, like let's just pause and make sure we're bringing compassion to the table. Cheryl, how in your practice of counselling, what have you seen as some of the most effective ways of helping people reduce their anxiety?
Okay, so I've just put down a list of 10 top tips. The first thing, when you're experiencing anxiety, often we forget to breathe. So breathing is really helpful. Slow, deep breathing, and Jeremy will talk a little bit more about how to do that later. Probably, I hope. Staying hydrated. The body really struggles to find balance when we're not hydrated enough. Things like prayer and worship, reading the Bible or an audio version of the Bible, something coming into us or going from us that is focused on God and outside of ourselves. We're very focused inward when we're experiencing anxiety, and so anything that takes us out of ourself is helpful. Making healthy food choices is really important. There's such a connection between our gut health and our brain health, and so that's really important to work on. Practicing thankfulness and gratitude is a really powerful way to help our mind focus on what is good and true, and all of that's healthy for us. Getting our mind off ourselves, praying for others, blessing others, can really bring a sense of peace and well-being into our soul. getting grounded. So just the practice of taking your shoes and socks off, standing on the earth or on the grass for 5, 10, 20 minutes, the longer the better. If you think about the human body, on a windy day when you go to open the car, sometimes you'll get zapped and you'll actually see the sparks come out of the end of your fingers. Or, for me, it's my hair flies everywhere. So we've got a lot of electrical energy in us as human beings. So just like with a PowerPoint, with an electrical cord, it needs to be grounded. We need to get grounded. And so what I often do personally myself, if I'm feeling a bit agitated, I'll take my shoes off and I'll just stand on the top step of our pool. That's the thing that really grounds me. So water or earth are really, really helpful ways of just resetting, So getting out in nature, really important to get out in the beauty of God's world that He's provided for us, and Scott talked a little bit about that. We were born to be amongst nature. Mindfulness, so just bringing our mind back into the present, taking notice of what we can smell, what we can hear, what we can see, what we can taste, or what we can touch. Using our 5 senses will, at the simplest level, will help us to just give our brain a rest, but it's also a very therapeutic way of living life, staying in the present. The thing I'll use mostly with my clients is a process called tapping. Tapping is a process whereby we actually just physically tap on certain points on our face and upper body. What that's doing is we're actually connecting with some of that electricity in our body that is speaking to the amygdala. Remember that radar? And so it's actually interrupting the signals from the radar of the amygdala to our adrenals, so we can actually physically take a bit of control over that adrenaline surge that is happening in our body and help to ground ourselves. So there's a great app that is available called the Tapping Solution app, downloadable on your phones, and there's some really, really good things that you can tap along to if you want to note that as a resource. But at the moment, I just want to give you a little takeaway. I want to teach you how to tap with your fingers. So they call this discreet tapping because you're not actually in public tapping like this on your face or your body. So on the sides of our nail beds, there are electrical endpoints that if we just put a bit of pressure on them, you can just do it one-handed. So you're just putting a little pressure and rubbing each of those points. If you do it two-handed, you can do it either side of your fingers. And that often when we do that, we'll yawn, and that's an indication that we're resetting our body. If you don't yawn, it doesn't matter, but it's been shown that can have a big effect on helping to ground us and reset us. So that's just my little 10 top tips.
Very cool. So when Cheryl said that when we were chatting through this afternoon, for the rest of our time together, we were just squeezing our fingers. Scott, how do we retrain our internal narrative? Because we know from Scripture that our thought life is such an important part of this journey to getting well. I remember you shared in a message a month or so back here at church, and you asked this, you reframed that question that we often go to in a negative headspace when we're going to worst case scenarios, and you encouraged us to think about what if it all went right instead of what if it all went wrong. Can you just unpack that a little for us?
Yeah, so this probably speaks a lot to anxiety and worry. So what we know when we have anxiety disorders, there's a tendency for our mind to make a lot of negative what-if predictions. So, what if everything goes badly? What if they don't like me? What if I don't have enough? This sort of on and on process of negative predictions. And what I shared in that message is that there was a very compelling and good study that came out in 2020 that showed that for worry-prone individuals, around about 91.4% of the time, the worry predictions are totally wrong. They don't happen. 91.4%. But those worry predictions, right, because we're thinking them, they actually trigger the body's stress response. So we're tormented emotionally in advance to these things that don't end up happening. Now, a lot of people say, yeah, but that means 8.6% of the time my negative prediction comes true. Well, what they found is that, like, most of the time when it does come true, people handle it better than expected anyway. So like 80+% of the time. So what I said in that message is, if you're prone to worry, and I'm definitely one of these, this is why I love this stuff, that we don't pay attention to the fact that our mind is lying to us all the time, so we don't learn from it, right? We worry about something, make a negative prediction, then we go through the event. Most of the time it doesn't happen, or we handle it better than expected. We feel a sense of relief, and then we careen into the next worry, right? We don't learn. Yeah, and so what I suggested in that talk is some rewiring strategies, ways that we can rewire our brain with neuroplasticity. And the first of those strategies was the predictions of the world technique. I use this personally. I teach it to a lot of clients. And basically what it involves is, when you're worried about something, you take the time to write down the worry prediction in the form of, my mind is predicting that, all right, and fill in the blank. And then you rate on a 0 to 100% scale how much you believe that prediction. Then you watch to see what actually happens. And this is the key. You have to discipline yourself to write down what actually happened. All right? Because what that will do is, over and over and over again, it will show you and cause you to pay attention to the fact that your mind is lying to you. All right? Our mind is ridiculously inaccurate. And after a while, when worries come to you, it sort of loosens the grip of them. You're more able to go, yeah, I've heard this before, right? And that can be soothing. So that's one technique to begin rewiring. The second one, which is what you referred to, is it actually comes from a motivational speaker called Mel Robbins, and she calls it the 6 magic words. What if it all works out? So this is the question, if you're worry and anxiety prone, you never ask yourself. Right, but we can learn to ask ourselves this, so we can vividly imagine how it might actually turn out well, or at least neutral. Right. So, for example, if I'm coming into a talk like this tonight, and my mind's telling me that I'm going to stumble over my words and go blank, and it'll be all embarrassing. Right, that's the worry prediction. If I go, what if it all works out? I actually picture in my mind a couple of things: either that I'm going to speak clearly, it's going to land well. Or maybe I do stumble over my words and lose my place and go blank, but then I can go, okay, I've got my notes here. I can look at them. There's lots of grace in the room. I'm sure people aren't going to throw tomatoes at me. All right? And so by entertaining that and thinking about that, I'm actually soothing myself. And more than that, I'm actually being intellectually honest, because 91.4% of the time, the negative prediction I'm making is not going to happen. So it's actually more accurate. Right? And so combining these kinds of techniques, predictions of the world, what if it all works out, we're rewiring the brain to be less threat focused, right? And I said to the guys earlier that we get really good at what we practice, right? Really good at what we practice. So if we just go with our worry, anxiety thoughts and never challenge them, we get really good at it. Right, exceptionally good at being very threat focused. But if we begin to practice these types of skills and we do it over and over and over, we get really good at that, right? At actually thinking in ways that are much more helpful and soothing and anxiety reducing. And I brought in one last thing. I've actually got a heap of these that people can grab afterwards. Jono suggested maybe one per family if people want to do that, because I don't think I've got enough for everyone. But this is a little technique that kind of combines those two things I was talking about there. It's called the 4 worry questions. And so I'll just walk through the 4 questions that if you're a real worrywart and an anxiety-prone person, the first question is, what is the worry monster telling me might happen? So that's the getting clear on the prediction. What is the worry monster telling me what might happen? The next question is, how likely is that really? All right, and on the back of the card, you'll find a likelihood scale. So it goes from it won't happen to unlikely to happen, it might happen, likely to happen to it will happen. Now, why that's important is that people who are anxious and worried, they don't see the nuances. If I'm thinking it, then it's going to happen. Right, what we're doing here is we're promoting cognitive flexibility to actually see, wait a minute, it may not be as likely as I'm telling myself. So that's helpful. Third question, what is more likely to happen? What are other potential positive or neutral outcomes? So this aligns with the what if it all works out, right? We're deliberately entertaining the ways that it might actually work out well, and we're creating that neural pathway. And the final question, I call it the worst case scenario question. If we've concluded that our worry prediction is very likely to occur, we're convinced it's going to go badly, then we can cope ahead by asking ourselves, well, if it is likely to happen, what can I do to help myself through it? What wise advice or guidance would I give to a friend if they were in my shoes? So we're accessing our problem solving, helping ourselves to kind of prepare for worst case scenario, which is often very soothing as well. So tools like this can help reset the narrative or reset our brain in a more soothing kind of direction. So.
Rose or Isaac, out of the things just mentioned, anything that you've found particularly helpful or want to comment on?
I know in my experience, and certainly from hearing both of you talk about the therapies that you use, that I sort of conceive anxiety almost as a disorder of attention, in that we're inappropriately giving attention to the things that are happening in either our body or our mind. So I know for myself that, when that heart rate's up or my lungs and chest feel really tight, I'm giving attention to that, which just makes it worse. And in the same way, when you're having a what-if thought, then you're giving attention to that thought and going down the spiral. So I know that with my psychologist, I've done a lot of the things that Cheryl was talking about, and that really a common theme there is shifting your attention towards something else. So perhaps shifting it outwardly. So for example, I'm up here speaking now, and at first I was quite anxious, but I've tried to shift my attention out to the audience so I can focus on you guys and not what's going on in my mind. And in the same way, with physical sensations, if a heart rate's up, it's good to instead focus on breathing slowly, as Cheryl was mentioning. So yeah, I think that would be my takeaway, is that anxiety, attention is really foundational to anxiety, and it's really a muscle. And if we work it, we can become stronger at managing it and stronger at shifting it.
Keep going. So, Dr. Jeremy, when does medication help us in terms of our mental health? And what can we do to help our mental health based in biology, non-drug measures?
Before I answer that, I just wanted to say two quick things to Isaac's point. First off is, these things take time. So in all treatments, everything that we do takes time. Finding a doctor takes time, one that you like. If you start medications, that takes time. Studies show about 3 weeks at least, up to 8 weeks for maximum effectiveness. Psychology, psychoeducation, changing your mind, takes time. So he said a good word, perseverance, as in if you try and it doesn't work, try again. And again, and again, and again, and again, and again, and again. And by 2 or 3 months, if you're doing all the things that we as a panel have told you are healthy tips, you will get positive change. The second thing I wanted to mention is that a lot of my patients will tell me, I just lack motivation. And I say, that's very good. That doesn't exist. We have this idea of what motivation should be like, and this is what they imagine. They wake up, pop out of bed, and say, I feel like going to work. I'm so happy. I really like to exercise. I want to take care of myself, and that's what they imagine their mental health journey is going to be like. And so I tell them, this idea of motivation, there's no such thing. Okay, I'm going to take that vocabulary away from you, and I'm going to insert a word called momentum. And what momentum looks like is that a large body in motion stays in motion. And if it's not in motion, it is really hard to get it start to going. And so like a dead car, the first inch of pushing that dead car is extraordinarily difficult. But the next inch is a bit easier. And the next inch, easier and easier and easier and easier. And as the system gains momentum and speed, then moving forward becomes much more easy. To the point where if you're traveling on a highway and you take the foot off the accelerator, you're going to coast pretty quickly for a really long time. And that is motivation. That is when you wake up in the morning and you feel like doing things because you've been doing them for so long that it is now a habit. That's the thing that I tell my patients. That's what we're aiming for. That takes time and perseverance. Now, why I've prefaced this question with these 2 points is because we're talking about treatments now. And so the 2 questions posed is, when do we use medication and when do we take off? And are there other non-medication treatments? So firstly, we say, and we have an understanding that medications for both depression and anxiety, the worse the severity, the more the benefits of the medications. So very few patients who have mild disease would we start with medications, unless there's a very good reason why. But as the severity becomes moderate and severe and extremely severe, then we're really grasping at straws here. So we just throw everything into the mix, and medications are part of that. Now, I think the stigma against medications is because we've had medications for mental health for probably 80 to 100 years. And the stuff that we used to use were atrocious. They were really poor side effects. They made you feel bombed out. They blunted your affect, meaning you were just a blank stare. You didn't feel like you were your own person. They had very difficult side effects: sexual dysfunction, dry mouth, lack of sleep, blurry vision, all of that sort of stuff. The stuff we use now is brilliant. If you look at the side effect profile, it's quite like placebo, like taking sugar pills. And so some of them will have transient side effects that last 2 or 3 weeks, but they're generally very well tolerated. But we still, as a society, remember, the parents will tell us about all of these scenarios. Oh, I remember Auntie so-and-so took this medication and she went nuts. And so if you kept growing up getting used to telling these stories, then when it's your turn to think about, and the doctor says, hey, we need some medication, you go, no, thank you, no way. And so part of that, we use these self-scores for either depression or anxiety. So they're something called DAS-21 or K10, and there's other ones out there. And we try to, on this sliding scale, see where the patient is. How severe are your symptoms? Because remember how we defined it? We defined it as dysfunction. So how bad are these symptoms? How much of the day are they happening? And that then leads to dysfunction. How dysfunctional are you because of what you're suffering from? The more dysfunction, the more we help and we use medications. And the same is the context from when we want to take medications away. Now, one of the most common concerns about patients is before they even start, they're worried about how they're going to end, right? And they say, Doc, how long am I going to take these medications for? Is it going to change my personality? And will I be addicted to them? Now, I just wanted to answer this by saying there is no addictive potential to these medications at all. You are not going to break into someone's house, steal their TV, and sell it for antidepressants, okay? That's not going to happen. What we think about when we say addicted is, am I going to be dependent on this? Is this going to be something I'm going to be taking for the rest of my life? And the question to that is probably not, but maybe. And it depends where you come from. So a story like Isaac's, where you have mild to moderate anxiety, where it's intermittent, where it's situational based, then even if someone like Isaac used some medication for 6 months or 12 months, he most likely is going to do so well that he's going to naturally not need it anymore. Why? Because also it's the momentum. He's changing his mindset, he's changing his lifestyle, he's wrapping some services and some support around him, and then he's going to do really well because his resilience is going to go up. If you take a story more like Rose's, where it's been long set, where you've had a deep genetic component, where you look at the severity of it, and it's severely dysfunctional to the point where suicide ideations, hospitalizations, multiple medications are needed to have some sort of semblance of functionality, then the question then begs, well, what's the benefit and risk of staying on these medications versus coming off of it? Now, no medication is perfect. They've got costs, they've got side effects. But if the risk of coming off of it is severely dysfunctional again, or to the point of hospitalization again, well, then the obvious choice would be to stay on the medications. And then that would be a medication that you would take for the rest of your life. Now, that is dependent, well, yes, but not really. It's treatment to stay functional. So I hope that really clarifies from a medical perspective how we end up thinking and talking to our patients about this. Now, what's expected when you go and renew your medications every 6 months is that your doctor would take you through this entire process again, because at every 6 to 12 months, we make these decisions again. Is it beneficial or not beneficial to stay on these medications? Now, we've talked about the natural antidepressants. Cheryl's done a great job, and then same with Scott, about what are the healthy things that we can do to boost our mental health? Because it's not medications or lifestyle, it's medications and lifestyle and therapy and change and social. Like everything together means it's the most potent treatment. So I just wanted to touch on a few things because they've already taken off most of the things on my list. But speaking about sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems. Now, these are two sides of the same coin, and that coin is called the autonomic nervous system. Auto meaning it is automatic, out of your control. Now, these things also control things out of your control, things like blood pressure, things like digestion, things like arousal and concentration. Now, these things happen regardless of whether you think of them or not, and they happen in a split second. So if something pops up, you feel that tingling throughout your body, and it happens very rapidly. So what we notice is that all of these symptoms of anxiety are part of the sympathetic nervous system. And as we've said with attention focused on it, and it's inappropriate, which means the sympathetic nervous system is firing constantly throughout the whole day in inappropriate situations. So you're at home quiet and it's still firing. So how do we then, if it's out of your control, how do we then combat that? And it's a couple of things I wanted to share. Now, the flip side to that is parasympathetic. Para meaning in parallel, but opposite. And so the parasympathetic nervous system is for relaxation and restoration. It's when you digest. It's when you're quiet. It's when you're ready to go to sleep. So if these things are not in your control, well, how then do we influence these systems? There's one trick. Now, there's a group of nerves from your brain called the cranial nerves. There's 12 of them, and you study it in med school, and Isaac will be an expert at this because he's going through it now. But number 10, the vagus nerve, is the thickest, largest, and longest cranial nerve in your whole body. It runs from your brain, down your spinal cord, and then into your throat, into your chest cavity, through your lungs, through your diaphragm, and into your guts. So it's about 2 feet long, quite thick. Now, 75% of this vagus nerve is made up of parasympathetic nerves. And so its whole job is for rest and relaxation, digestion, deep breathing, all that sort of stuff. And it is a great counter to what we've been talking about here, which is the sympathetic nervous system. So how do we turn on this vagus nerve? Well, Cheryl said tapping. Why? Because it's a cranial nerve. So the vagus nerve also has branches of it throughout your whole face. So when you tap your cheeks, your forehead, behind the ears, what you're doing is you're stimulating the vagus nerve. There's other ways that we can do it as well. Bimanual massage of your ear. So if everyone tries it now, you want it hard and slow. So you're rubbing your ear, you're rubbing your tragus, this little meaty part in front of your ear, or you're rubbing in front and behind your ear here. Does everyone feel calmer already? It's good, right? No? Okay. So that's one trick. The second trick is the vagus nerve runs through your lungs and into your diaphragm. So any type of strong diaphragmatic contraction increases the tone through your vagus nerve. So that is yawning, sobbing, laughing, and deep breathing. Now, we don't really want everyone to sob or laugh, because that sometimes is not controllable. But When we do deep breathing and we contract the diaphragm and we hold it, that's another way that we're sending signals through the vagus nerve. Now, in terms of deep breathing, we want sort of 8 to 10, 12 breaths per minute. It's pretty good. But the lower the breath count per minute, the better. And the magic number is somewhere between that 4 to 6 breaths per minute. So what I teach my patients is called a 1 to 2 breathing technique. And so it's for every 1 second you're breathing in, you're spending 2 seconds breathing out. Okay? So the breathing out must be longer than the breathing in. And what we also want to do is breathe against your throat being closed a little bit or against pursed lips, because we need the diaphragm to squeeze hard through the entire exhalation. So it looks like this if you're doing 3 counts in and 6 counts out. So in, out. Okay? And we start there at 3 to 6, and we do a few breaths of that. And when you feel at ease enough, then we increase it 4 to 8. And then when you're relaxed enough, 5 to 10. So 5 breaths in, 5 counts in, 10 counts out. And when you get to 5 and 10, that's 1 breath will take you 15 seconds, which means 4 breaths per minute, which means you're breathing very slow. And the only way you can keep from passing out is lower your heart rate, lower your blood pressure, and increase all of the carbon dioxide in your body. That actually releases your hemoglobin to release more oxygen. So the higher your carbon dioxide in your system, the more you're able to release oxygen to your brain, which is why when people are hyperventilating, what do? You give them a brown paper bag, right? What do we do when we do that? We're recycling our carbon dioxide to increase carbon dioxide in our body, which then paradoxically releases oxygen from our hemoglobin. Weird, right? Okay. The other things that we'll talk about is sleep. Now, the 2 things I wanted to teach you about sleep is to make sure that we understand that most people need around 6 to 8 hours. Some people less, some people more, but around that. Now, it also makes a difference the timing of when you sleep. So shift workers, any shift workers here? I was a shift worker once. It's terrible. And can you, if I asked you, if you sleep during the day, how rested do you feel after? Terribly rested, right? Okay. So there's something about sleeping before midnight. Every hour of sleep you can get before midnight is worth 2 or 3 after. So sleep early. The other thing is around deep sleep. Now, this is before REM sleep. So REM sleep's the rapid eye movement where you dream. That's also a function of changing short-term to long-term memory. So that's a really important part of sleep architecture. But before that happens, we need deep sleep. So there's phases of sleep, 1 to 4. And 4 is when you're completely paralyzed and just snoring away blissfully. But what does that do neurologically to your brain? 2 things. There's a type of cell called the glial cells. Now, about 70 or 80% of your brain matter is made up of astrocytes and glial cells, and they're not nerve tissue. They're just supportive tissue to your brain. They maintain the brain. They feed all of the nerve cells in your brain, and they clean up the mess, because the brain is quite active, and so there's lots of metabolites of neurotransmitters lying everywhere. And so the function of the astrocytes and the glial cells is boosted when you have deep sleep. Okay, so deep sleep is super important. And the other thing is when you have phase 3 and 4 sleep, all of the pumps in your brain turn on, and it washes all the CSF, the cerebral spinal fluid, washes that out. So it's almost like you flush your toilet every night, and if you get poor sleep, it's only a half flush. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. All right. The last thing I'll say is about going outside. Now, there is so many benefits of going outside. You probably are going to exercise when you go outside. Right? There is bright light, so that's really good for your circadian rhythm. The thing that releases melatonin is actually, so your eyes will split. And so one part will go into one side of the brain and one will cross. And so your eyes have a nerve that crosses like this. And there's a pineal gland that sits right in the middle of that cross that makes melatonin. And so that gland will produce way more melatonin when you have good night and day cycles. Okay, so bright light is super good for circadian rhythm and getting sleep right. But the other thing about going outside that we find is that there's something to do with infrared light. Now, if you know the visual spectrum of the rainbow of colors that you can see, outside of purple is called UV, ultraviolet. That sort of damages your skin. And you've got infrared on here. So you know those heat-seeking cameras? So that works on infrared light. Now, the sun shines infrared light. It also bounces off of plant material that's green, because infrared and green bounces off infrared. And so there's something to do with the infrared touching your skin that increases the functionality of these little things, organelles inside your cells called mitochondria. They're responsible for the efficiency of making energy, ATP. And so if you have dysfunctional mitochondria, you will feel tired, sleepy, amotivated. Okay? So it's not just the dopamine in your brain. It's the fact that your cells are not working in good order. Going outside and getting infrared light to the point where you're in greenery because it's reflecting all around you and getting the sun to shine on top of your head, this has been proven in studies to increase your energy production. Crazy, right? Cool.
Cheryl, when is it wrong to experience anxiety? Can depression and anxiety be sinful, and if so, when?
I just want to say up front that depression and anxiety is not sinful. Mental illness, like physical illness, is a consequence of the fall. Sin has introduced brokenness into the world, which can lead to various forms of suffering, and we've all experienced suffering of some description, and that includes mental challenges. Just as legs can break and eyes might not see, so it's possible for minds not to work as they were designed to do. The Bible shows those who struggle with their mental health are not alone. So Hannah yearned for a child, and she prayed and worshipped in such a desperate way that the priest actually thought she was drunk. She was so beside herself. Elijah, running from Jezebel, was exhausted and burnt out, and God just said to him, eat, drink and sleep. Job lost everything and suffered incredibly, but he came to recognise the goodness of God. David recorded in so many Psalms his groanings and his weeping, but he trusted in God's unfailing love. None of them saw it as sin, it was just the human condition. And Jesus sweated blood because of his extreme distress in the Garden of Gethsemane, but he was ultimately obedient to the call on his life. So anxiety and depression in themselves are not sinful. They're just part of the human experience. But our sin can affect our mental health. So think of it this way. If you're in your car, you're racing over the speed limit, you crash, you break a leg, there's going to be consequences for that. So breaking the law, sinful. Having a broken leg, just the consequence of it. So it's not sinful in itself, it's just the consequence of the choices that we've made. In the same way that if we make choices that are sinful, our mental health can be affected. Often there's shame and there's guilt, and there can often be a sense of condemnation when we realise that we've made a sinful choice, and that can certainly affect our mental well-being. And we've all made ungodly decisions at different times in our lives. We've acted and said things that were not godly. So there's consequences for the choices that we've made, and they often show up in the state of our mental health. But even though the choices we've made or are currently making can have a significant effect or impact on our mental health, it's actually how we respond to that that's important. Remember, when we're always seeking relief from how we feel. When we have anxiety or depression, we're looking for something to make us feel better and more grounded. So when we look for relief, make sure that we're looking in the right places. Inward focus. If we look at ourselves as anxious, depressed people, what we're saying is that my identity is a depressed person. My identity is an anxious person. That is not who we are. Our identity is in Christ. We're the son or a daughter of God. And so the enemy would want to steal that from us. So we think of mental health challenges as happening to us. They're external from us and they come visit us. And how we deal with that is really important. But they are not our identity. Trying to do it alone or hiding. In that, there's often shame or there's pride. Or do we seek help? Which is a godly thing to do. And so what I want to say is there's always opportunities to make godly choices about how we deal with our mental health and how we deal with the sin that can affect our mental health. But never forget that we live under grace. That's a really important thing to hold on to. I just want to say that other people's sin that is perpetrated upon us can cause us distress and can exacerbate our difficulty with mental health, but it's not ours the sin is not ours. So it's important to remember that. Don't take on someone else's stuff as your own. So there's no guilt, no blame or no condemnation that you need to be burdened with.
Amen. Thank you. Scott, how does being in community help in our fight against depression and anxiety? What difference does it make in being in strong community?
I would say it's probably the most important thing. There's a case to be made that most mental illness is a disruption of secure attachment to others and God. It's a sort of foundational thing to feel securely attached to others and safe in relationships. And when that gets disrupted, it can cause all sorts of problems for us. And, we've got to remember we're made in the image of a God who is a relationship. Father, Son, Holy Spirit in eternal relationship. So we are relational to the core. When God made Adam, he said it's not good that man is alone. Not good. So it's actually bad for us to be in disconnection and loneliness. In fact, some of you may have heard of this, that there is research now showing that loneliness and social disconnection is more damaging to our long-term health and mortality than smoking cigarettes. Right? The reason being is that we're meant to be connected to others. When we're not, it triggers a stress response in the system, which is felt as loneliness, and it's actually meant to drive us back into connection. Just like we have the discomfort of thirst or hunger when we're thirsty or when we need water or we need food, and that drives us to those things. Loneliness is a stress response that drives us to connection. But of course, if we stay stuck in that state, stress response, the sympathetic nervous system stays switched on. Eventually that leads to a suppression of our immune system, which makes us more prone to disease and illness. So it's a big deal. I work a lot in the field of addiction, and I remember coming across this study that they did with monkeys. And what they did is they put some monkeys in total social isolation, and then they had others that were socially housed, and then they scanned their brains after a period of time. And what they found is the monkeys that were individually housed, their dopamine system, that reward pathway that makes us feel pleasure and motivation and enjoyment in life, was totally downregulated. It had dropped dopamine receptors, and as opposed to the ones that were socially housed. And then what they did is they gave them the opportunity to take drugs. And the monkeys that had the downregulated dopamine system began to use drugs compulsively and addictively, whereas the monkeys that were offered drugs that were socially housed were much less likely to do that. So poor mental health, more addiction prone when we are isolated. You can see how that translates to the human condition as well. So the question is, why is social connection and support so powerful? And there's a couple of reasons. I think first of all, it's so easy to get caught in the echo chamber of our own mind. Right? In fact, research shows that the greatest risk for rumination, which is a core feature of anxiety and depression, to just think and think and think and think and rev up our stress response and our bad emotions through just circling on problems. Highest predictor, extended time alone. Right? So when we're around other people, it shifts our focus outwards, but it also provides an opportunity, if we're willing to be vulnerable, for people to challenge our way of thinking, to offer other alternatives for how we deal with our problems and issues, right? So we don't get stuck in the echo chamber of our mind so much. The second reason I think social connection is so important is there's strength in numbers, right? And I use a metaphor. I might have to get Jeremy to hold the microphone. I want to give you a metaphor of like a single paddle pop stick, okay? So life, as we know it, is full of stresses, and we have an enemy of our soul who attacks us. And if we're out there all on our own and that pressure's coming on us, we snap so easy. All right, it's just like out in the what do they call it, the savannah? I don't know whether that's the right word. If the animal gets off on its own, the lion attacks it. You know, it's that kind of idea. Whereas if we are part of community and we're bonded together, like there's no way I can break that. All right, there is strength in numbers. So that connection matters on that level as well. But just a couple of qualifiers here. That the first thing is we have individual differences in how much social connection we need. So if you're like me, I'm by nature an introvert and highly sensitive by nature. I get completely peopled out if I'm around people all the time. My battery gets drained. So I actually need a lot of solitude. Now that doesn't mean I don't need connection. I still need connection. Right, but I also need solitude, or else it will affect my mental health. Whereas the more extroverted among us, you get recharged by being around people, and so being in community a lot is really important. So I think we need to respect those individual differences and not see the highly sensitive introverts as being kind of snobbish if they don't hang out as much. Maybe that's what they need. So yeah, those individual differences. The second thing is the quality of the social connection. Right? That you can be around people but feel even more painfully alone, right? Being alone in a crowd. And what was really interesting, that study I told you about before with the monkeys, there was an added element to it. They found that the monkeys that were socially housed but were low in rank, meaning that they were kind of excluded or picked on, that sort of thing, they actually showed the same deficit in the dopamine reward system in the brain as the individually housed monkeys. So in other words, feeling like you don't belong and you're not connected is just as damaging to the brain. So what I'm saying is we need to find places and spaces where we can feel valued and accepted and like we belong. Places where we can take the risk of being vulnerable. All right, because loneliness is often because we've got stuff going on but we're not sharing it with anyone. We don't have intimacy, right? Into me you see. Yeah, we don't allow other people in, but if we can find the right place where we can, you know, the good, the bad, and the ugly can be spoken about and we can be loved in that, that's where the healing happens. And I think church communities are an awesome place for that to occur. You know, we can use our gifts and abilities, which provides a sense of meaning and esteem, but it's also, if we're struggling, we can be prayed for. You know, we can be part of Bible study groups, men's and women's ministries. I know for myself in the men's ministry, we talk about fractal groups or foxholes, which is a small group of men that meet up regularly and talk life. And I cannot tell you the difference that's made in my own life. I also have a mentor, which happens to be Cheryl's husband, Paul, who I talk life with probably for the last 9 or 10 years. That's been so helpful for me. You know, where you can be real it just helps our mental health so much. And, you know, if we're struggling, if we've got barriers inside of us that, you know, traumas and things that make it very difficult for us to connect with others, sometimes it's starting in counselling. That's the safe place, you know, where we can begin to have a sense of connection, right, in a safe environment. But, yeah, it matters a lot.
So, Scott's just mentioned prayer, and we're getting up to our final question, but there will be prayer available up here tonight, to just wander up here and find someone to chat to, and someone you know in this church family, we'd love to support you in that way. As just another element of encouragement for you tonight. But Jeremy, what about those who are just at the end of their rope and just can't see any hope and wanting to give up on life right now? What's your word to them?
I wanted to answer this in 3 parts. First is just to outline why suicide matters and how prevalent it is, and why, especially in a church setting, it would be so detrimental. Second is about how to think about suicide, and third's about how to prevent it. So in our preparation of this talk, Isaac was the one who brought up how deadly suicide actually is. So we're talking about community mental health here, depression and anxiety. But if you crank up the dial, and you crank up the severity, and you crank up the length of the burden of disease, where do you end up? Suicide. So it is a sliding scale, and by talking about numbers 1 to 9, we have to talk about where it ends up, suicide. Now, Isaac looked up some statistics, and suicide is the number 1 killer of people between the ages of 15 to 45, even more than traffic accidents, more than drugs, more than smoking, more than any natural disease. So, Scott laid out that mental health is on the rise. It's on the rise in industrialized nations to levels which we've never seen before. And with the prevalence of technology and AI and the cost of living, life's really tough. And so most people will find that their struggles are real, and they're becoming increasingly to the point where they don't know where else to turn. And so that leaves us then with suicide. Now, in the community, we have a strong stigma against suicide. Why? Because they think that it's the easy way out, or they think that people who commit suicide are selfish, that they are weak, that their systems are overloaded. And that's not true at all. But even in the church, it's magnified because then we think that it's a mortal sin to commit suicide. And those who do are damned to hell. And so there's an inordinate amount of guilt and shame and embarrassment for people who feel like that, or who have committed or attempted. And for people who have committed and left loved ones, what do you do with that? It's just something that is painfully difficult to think about, or to talk about, or to open up. So sometimes when I speak to my patients who either feel like that or have attempted suicide, they go through this mental anguish. And when you actually speak with them, it's the exact opposite thing in their mind. So most of the time, people would not commit suicide because they're too afraid of it. So they think to themselves, I'm a coward because I can't do it. And so for the people who actually do attempt, they think it is the most selfless act they can do, because in their mind, in that echo chamber, they think that there's such a burden on everybody else around them that it is the kindest thing they can think of to do, to relieve everybody else's tension, and just don't worry about me because I'm going to take myself out. So it's not always the case, but it's a prevalent thought when I'm seeing patients on the other end of that. So when we're speaking about mental health, we love analogies, right? I've given a few already, but when I like to think about suicide, I make the analogy that, so if you imagine this auditorium as your life, I ask my patients, how good of a time are you having in this auditorium? So if you're having a party, surrounded by all your friends, music's pumping, there's food, well, then you're having a great time, aren't you? Now, suicide is that exit door. So everyone turn around, look at that green light. Yep, that's the exit sign. Now, whether the auditorium is good or bad, big or small, if you're having a good time or not, that exit sign's there. And if you're having a rotten time, well, you're thinking about, well, how do I edge my way out? How do I edge myself closer? I'm just going to grab my jacket. I'm going to scoot my way to the exit sign. I'm gonna touch the door. I'm thinking about what's on the outside. I'm opening it, taking a peek outside, because you're just having a rotten time here. And so what I tell my patients is this: you've moved really close to that exit sign. It's telling me that you have a lot of dysfunction in your life. You're having a rotten time. So how on earth am I going to get you back in here? Well, we have to fix what's going on in this auditorium, right? And so I talk to my patients about the 4 things that we can do. The first one is to clean up. This place is just full of junk, full of things that you don't like. So what does that mean? It means getting your life in order, the natural antidepressants, cleaning up your sleep, your exercise, your mood, getting socially connected, all of these sorts of things, clean up the place. All right, why don't we make the atmosphere of it better? Why don't we turn some lights on, put some decorations on, make this a more enjoyable environment? That is treatment and medications, how to clean up this environment. Get a bouncer. People are in here bullying you, pushing you around. Hire someone and get them out. And that's Scott, the psychologist. He's going to teach you to clean up some of these self-deprecating thinking patterns, to get the bullies out, to get the negative Nancy's out of this auditorium. And then we got to fill it with people that you like. So that's social connectedness, your neighbors, your church, your friends, your work. Fill it with people. And if you've done all these 4 things, you're not thinking about that exit sign anymore and how to move closer to it. So the last thing I want to do is end by speaking to the church. How are we on the lookout for people who have suicidal thoughts and ideations? And when we find someone, what do we do about it? So the first step is to be on the lookout. Now, what does that mean? It just means that there's so much dysfunction for mental health. So they will be acting in a way that they naturally don't act. They'll be really short. They'll be really gruff. They might not be so friendly, so open. They might not attend. So be on the lookout for people who you sit around or in your small group or in men's ministry. And if someone has missed a few, reach out to them and say, hey, how you going? I noticed you haven't been here. Are you doing okay? That means a lot to someone who has disconnected. And a lot of the times, one of the difficulties with large churches is you can come and go and no one will check up. No one will notice because no one knows your name. The second is to normalize the conversation. And so hopefully with this night and every time that we do it, mental health is going to be on the forefront of conversation. And just not only saying, how are you, but really meaning, how are you? How's your mental health? Are you struggling with anything? And normalizing that conversation because everybody struggles with mental health, just like everybody struggles with financial health. And so it's something that we just want to talk about because we want to be authentic in this church. You don't need to be an expert. No one's expecting that you do the job of Scott or Cheryl. But what we want to do is know where to draw the line and then how to ask for help. And so by reaching in and finding someone who isn't having a really good time, then where do you turn? And so having counseling services or psychologists or even a doctor's office, and maybe helping them make an appointment or helping them go and attend and say, hey, I know you're not having a good time. I know you're scared to go. Do you want me to go with you? And if you ask that, do you want me to attend with you? Most of the time they'll say yes. Ask plainly. So if you see someone struggling or really sad, ask them, are you thinking about suicide? Are you thinking about self-harm? It's a very simple question. It's painful when you beat around the bush. And when I ask my patients, are you thinking about suicide? Have you thought about it before? Have you attempted about it before? It's the same as asking, what is your age? Where do you live? What do you do? I ask with the same tonality. And it just comes across that it's another question that I'm caring about them and wanting information, and it takes away all of the awkwardness about talking about it. Knowing your local resources. So at the very end, we'll put up some counseling services. There are acute suicide emergency hotlines and things that you can do. So there's 4 or 5. There's a men's line, a women's line, a DV line, help me out here.
Suicide
callback
hotline service.
Yep.
Beyond Blue.
Beyond Blue. Yep.
Lifeline.
So there's about 5 or 6 ready to talk to anyone, whoever. And then there's offices that are open during work hours. So there's Headspace. And there's also emergency departments that have acute mental health care team members ready to talk to people who are suicidal. And really, it's just about reaching out. And so sometimes all it takes is a meal or an invitation or a coffee for someone to get that social connection. And it just takes that one. Because when people are thinking about suicide, it means that they've felt no hope for a really long time. So the tunnel's really dark and really long. And it just takes that one candlelight to shine light again. And that candle can be you. And all it takes is say, hey, do you want to come out to coffee? So it's not hard, but it takes intention. And the last thing is that it can't be left to the leadership. So the leadership of this church is few. They shepherd a lot. And so they need everybody to play their part. Because why? Because they cannot have the reach that you do. Everybody has their own unique reach. So men's, women's, play group, all of the seniors, the coffee, the people you sit around, your neighbors. So the leadership of the church cannot reach into the places that you can reach. So it means that everybody has to play their part.
Why don't you thank them all for sharing? It was an amazing night. I appreciate you all so much. Thank you. So precious that you've opened your hearts, and we've all benefited, I hope and I pray. I want to close by mentioning some numbers for you in terms of follow-up. The Hills Church number there is a free counselling service. The Hills Church is our sister church down the road in Everton Hills. It's a Wesleyan church. And that counselling service is actually free if you have a child under 18. So that's the catch there. But by all means, call the office and they'll try and make a way to get you help there. And then the foundation counselling at Castle Dine. If it helps anyone to know this, I went there myself last year and found it extremely helpful. So there are some Christian psychologists at that centre as well. And so I recommend both as a follow-up for you. So Hills Church, Everton Hills, a free counselling service. It's specifically designed for anyone who has children under 18. That's where their government grants kick in. But I think they would try and help you regardless of that. So call them. But then the Foundation's counselling is a psychology service. But with the mental health plan, you're reducing your fee by about half if you see a doctor first. So I encourage you, if you are in need of those services, to seek them out. Of course, we will pray for you, and there'll be people available here when we finish tonight to do that. And of course, as Jeremy just encouraged us, to look out for one another. We are a body, we are a family, and it is on us to look out for each other. And so I encourage you with all of those things. And I just hope that tonight you found some hope and encouragement. And I also pray that even if the things spoken of tonight are not things that you directly struggle with or relate to, that your compassion capacity grew, and that you perhaps have a little more understanding for those who are battling with some of these things, and you are better tooled up to help and be present in a conversation when you find yourself in one. Because if you're listening, they're there. People in our suburb are right there in these things. And so would you join me in closing in prayer for tonight?